Alabama to vote for embattled Senate candidate and accused child molester Roy Alabama state line.
Place in this plaza behind me. He is instead going to be touring the museum when he arrives and then delivering remarks to a smaller group assembled inside. That group will be civil rights veterans, museum patrons, and elected officials. And so he won't be taking part in that larger program. But as you mentioned, this invitation to the president to attend this opening and also the celebration of Mississippi's bicentennial has angered a lot of folks here in Mississippi. You have local Democrats who are skipping the event, civil rights activists, and you have some Mississippi Democrats who wanted the governor, Phil Bryant, to rescind his invitation to the president. Of course, it did not happen. This is a tweet from the governor earlier this week. He said, Mississippi should be proud that the president of the United States has agreed to speak at the Mississippi History and the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. The world will be watching our bicentennial celebration. Let us come together as one Mississippi. But a lot of the president's critics have said that's exactly the problem. This is someone who will be watching our bicentennial celebration. Let us come together as one Mississippi. But a lot of the president's critics have said that's exactly the problem. This is someone who they believe is a divider, not a unifier. Among those critics is the president and CEO of the NAACP, Derek Johnson, who spoke about his issue with President Trump attending this event last night on Aaron Burnett out front. Watch.
His attendance is a distraction from us having an opportunity to honor true Americans who sacrificed so much to ensure that democracy worked. It is unfortunate, in fact, it's an affront to those individuals who fought for voting rights to ensure that people had quality education and quality access to health care will be celebrated. Those are principles this president do not support.
And we know that the NAACP president is not going to be attending today's event. They instead had their own separate event to mark today, a press conference a little bit earlier. You mentioned earlier that two U.S. congressmen, Benny Thompson from right here in Mississippi and John Lewis, who was going to be part of this program. He is, of course, a Georgia congressman who was a civil rights icon in his own right, beaten during voting rights marches in Selma, Alabama, Bloody Sunday. Both of them are now pulling out. They are still listed on this program as part of the program, but they are pulling out in protest. And we've gone through some of the reasons that people have an issue with the president taking part here, but it's a pretty long list. Rights activists have spoken out about the fact that the president had questioned the legitimacy of the first black president of the United States. He has endorsed a Senate candidate in Alabama, Roy Moore, who said that America was last great during slavery. He called Mexican immigrants rapists during his campaign announcement, and a long list of issues that people have with this president. They say he has not been a defender of civil rights and should not be part of this program. Fred?
All right, and still unclear exactly what has been. There have been so many people who've decided no longer to participate. All right, Athena Jones, thank you so much. We'll check back with you. All right, meantime, President Trump's visit to Mississippi comes just hours after he rallied for embattled rafters. The crowd was loud, loving, and really smart. They definitely get what's going on. Thank you, Pensacola. So with just now 3 days, Alabama's special, she was at last night's rally. So Caitlin, the president, didn't go to Alabama to offer support to Moore. He was about 25 miles away in Florida, but he did essentially give support to Roy Moore and saying that he was the one who was going to carry the Trump agenda.
Yeah, that's certainly right, Fred. And though he didn't come to Alabama, technically he was right next door in Pensacola, which is just a 20-mile drive from the state line of Alabama. And there were several Alabama voters in that arena last night because we personally spoke with several of them. And at one point during the president's speech last night, he asked the people of Alabama in that arena to stand up and cheer. Now, he waited a little bit before he got to where he was endorsing Roy Moore, but he certainly got there. And he expressed to the people in that arena that it was vital to the American interest that they have Roy Moore in that Senate seat over someone like Doug Jones. He was extremely critical of Doug Jones during that speech, and he did not hardly reference the allegations that have been made against Roy Moore, except to say that the one woman, Beverly Nelson, who says she was just 16 years old when Roy Moore assaulted her, and she's brought forth her yearbook where he signed it and said that his inscription is part of the proof that he sexually assaulted her. And the reporters that he finds them troubling and concerning, and that if they're true, he should step aside. But last night we heard from the president himself, Fred, and he offered a very forceful and full-throated endorsement of Roy Moore just days ahead of this election. And this is right next to Alabama, a state that the president won overwhelmingly during the election last year. So his endorsement.
Now, joining me now is David Swerdlick, a CNN political commentator and assistant editor for the Washington Post. Also with me, Julian Zeltzer in a very snowy New York City, a CNN political analyst and historian and professor at Princeton University. All right, thanks. Good to see both of you. All right, David,
Fred.
let me begin with you. You know, the president now in full campaign mode for Roy Moore. Just 3 days until voters in Alabama go to the polls. So how much momentum does this give a Roy Moore?
I think it helps Roy Moore, and I think it also helps Roy Moore that we're already a month out from the original Washington Post story where 4 different women accused Roy Moore of trying to date them or, in one case, sexually assaulting them as teenagers. So, you know, it has faded a little bit from the original shock of that initial report. The Real Clear Politics polling average says that it's 48 for Moore, 46 for Jones. In my view, that's too close to make a prediction on who's going to win. I think it'll come down to turnout. That, I think, is why President Trump, even though he's not going into Alabama, is going to Pensacola and Mississippi to try and draw attention to the race, signal that he is behind Moore. He has said as much on Twitter, but he wants to have his cake and eat it too, Fred, because as Caitlin reported, he's made statements saying he still has concerns about the allegation. So if he has concerns about the allegation, it's not completely clear why he's giving Moore this full-throated endorsement, but a lot of it, I think, centers around this idea that Republicans understand they have a thin margin in the Senate and they want that seat.
And so, Julian, the GOP, you know, has a long tradition of running on family values. And now with these allegations of, in one case, rape, of inappropriate behavior, of pursuing underage young ladies here, with this endorsement of a Roy Moore, does that mean that whole family values mantra is just simply out the window for the GOP, for the Republican Party?
Well, we saw that conversation during the 2016 election with President Trump, and many evangelical leaders and voters were willing to vote for the president despite the same kinds of contradictions, and here they are facing the same debate. So I think they're willing to do that. I think there's a level of hypocrisy in American politics that would let a group live with this. But, you know, Roy Moore is really a test. Like, will be totally
in his 30s, but also these divisive remarks on race. What Roy Moore said when asked to talk about a time when America was great.
I think it was great at the time when the families were united. We had a direction, and we corrected many of the problems.
So, David, you know, how does Moore, the president, or the GOP, or anybody reconcile that?
Yeah, Fred, clearly Moore has retrogressive views on race, on same-sex marriage. He's been removed twice from the Alabama Supreme Court. This is not a guy who you would normally think of as someone who would be held in high esteem by Americans for representing American values. I don't want to turn away from that clip you just played, but I think that those are issues that people are going to debate, have debated, and are going to continue to debate. When you're talking about someone who has serial, credible allegations against him, though, of going to the mall and trolling for teenage girls, again, we're not talking about some rando here. We're talking about someone who was the deputy district attorney. That, to me, should be the issue on which the election turns. And, you know, as many people
and there's
have pointed
already
out,
substantiated cause and effect. Like you say, there were all these allegations of inappropriate, you know, behavior toward young people.
Right.
The shopping mall says, we don't want you here.
Right.
And then pick up your thought.
Yeah, I was just going to add, it's always worth pointing out that he has not been charged with a crime. He has not been convicted of this beyond a reasonable doubt. These are allegations. But if you read my Washington Post colleagues reporting, you read the reporting in Alabama.com, and you're an Alabama voter, and you go to the polls and you say, well, I like Republicans or I like Moore better than Jones, and I'm willing to risk, I've read these stories, and I'm willing to risk having a guy who's been alleged to have trolled the mall for children as my U.S. Senator, that is Julian just said this is a test for voters. I think he's absolutely right. This is a test for voters about what their citizenship is all about.
And a test for Americans and their ongoing support, for the President of the United States, who says he's going to support that, Julian. And in addition, while he was rallying, whether it be on the behalf of Roy Moore last night in Pensacola or perhaps rallying on behalf of himself, and today he's going to be speaking at a civil